The moment was quiet, almost deceptively so, when Barack Obama began to speak with a tone that was neither fiery nor combative. The television audience leaned in, expecting the usual polished lines and political reflections, but something about the way he adjusted his posture signaled that he was about to go further than anyone anticipated. He had been asked about leadership, about the responsibility that comes with power, and rather than keeping his answer in general terms, he steered directly into Donald Trump's shadow. His voice was calm, deliberate, and carried none of the usual heat that surrounded political clashes. It was this restraint, this unsettling steadiness, that made the words hit harder than any raised voice ever could. Obama began outlining how truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully someone tries to bury it. He spoke about patterns of behavior, about decisions made in rooms where only a handful of people were present, and about the trail those decisions inevitably leave. He did not shout Trump's name in accusation. Instead, he slipped it into the conversation with surgical precision, almost as though he were laying out evidence in a courtroom. The American people, he said, deserve to know when those in power put themselves first and the country second. And then he mentioned Trump, not with anger, but with a tone that suggested disappointment, as though the man had squandered something too precious to waste. That calmness made the entire studio still. The host didn't interrupt. The audience didn't murmur. Every word carried the weight of something that could not be brushed aside. He began recounting moments where Trump had promised transparency but delivered secrecy, where deals had been framed as victories, yet hidden layers told a darker story. He did not dramatize, he simply recounted facts. Each one dropped into the conversation like a stone falling into water, sending ripples through the air. Those ripples spread far beyond the studio, reaching into living rooms across the country, where families sat wide-eyed, sensing that something irreversible was being said live on television. Trump, however, was watching in real time. At first, his expression was one of contempt, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth as though he had heard it all before. He even leaned back, shaking his head, muttering insults toward the screen. But Obama's calm delivery began to pierce, deeper than the insults could cover. The steadiness was unnerving. Every time Obama mentioned his name, it was not in passing or as part of some exaggerated attack. It was measured, grounded, and reinforced with small but powerful details. It was the kind of delivery that left no room for easy deflection. 4. A man like Trump, whose public persona thrived on dominating conversations and framing narratives, being discussed in this manner was unbearable. He was used to fiery criticism, something he could easily counter with his own volume and force. But Obama was giving him none of that. Instead, the former president dismantled the facade layer by layer, all while keeping his tone calm and controlled. Watching it unfold, Trump began pacing. He grabbed his phone, ready to type out his fury into a post. But the words on the screen seemed inadequate to match the sting of what was being said. He slammed it down, glaring at the television, as if he could will the broadcast to stop. What made the calmness so effective was that it left no room for distraction. Audiences were not drawn into the theatrics of a shouting match. They were instead forced to confront the substance of the words themselves. Obama never raised his voice, never leaned into drama. He simply spoke as though the truth was obvious, as though it had been sitting in plain sight all along, waiting for someone with the authority and composure to put it into words. Each time he said Trump's name, the weight of silence afterward made it echo louder than any thunderous accusation could have. Those in the studio exchanged subtle glances, realizing they were witnessing more than just another political interview. They were watching a moment where calmness became a weapon sharper than outrage. Trump's name, spoken softly but repeatedly in the context of hidden truths, carried a sting that even his most loyal supporters couldn't easily dismiss. And as the interview rolled on, it became clear that the power in Obama's delivery wasn't in shocking revelations shouted to the world, but in the quiet dismantling of a carefully crafted image. By the time the segment ended, the audience wasn't clapping or cheering. They were sitting in stunned silence, absorbing what had just been laid out in the calmest of voices. Meanwhile, in another room miles away, Trump was anything but calm. His fury rose with every measured sentence, proving the irony that sometimes the quietest voice can deliver the most devastating blow. Do you want me to move on and expand Keynote 2 into 700 words the same way? When Obama moved from tone to substance, the entire energy of the broadcast shifted. People had expected commentary, maybe a few reflections on the current political climate, but not the kind of pointed revelations that came next. He began recounting specifics, the kind of details that aren't born from gossip but from a trail of decisions, documents, and conversations that could no longer be ignored. He wasn't speculative. He wasn't vague. He was precise, and the mention of Trump's name tied each point to a reality that felt heavier the longer he spoke. He began by noting how leaders are judged not only by their public promises, but by what they do when they think no one is watching. Then came the first story, drawn not from rumor but from insider knowledge that only someone with his level of access could confirm. It wasn't sensationalized. Obama described how, During Trump's time in office, there were instances where deals were presented to the public as victories, yet behind closed doors, the fine print favored narrow personal interests over national good. He told it plainly, offering enough detail to paint a clear picture without descending into conjecture. The audience shifted in their seats as if realizing they weren't hearing political rhetoric, they were hearing testimony. Trump, glued to the screen, grew restless. He knew Obama wasn't speaking like a rival trying to score points. He was speaking like a man peeling back the cover on events that had been meticulously shielded, and that was the difference. Secrets with substance are not easily dismissed, and Trump felt the ground shift beneath him as the steady flow of information painted him not as a misunderstood leader, but as a man who had hidden too much for too long. The next revelation came with the same calm clarity. Obama recounted conversations that had been whispered about in Washington but rarely confirmed. He brought them into the open, connecting Trump to decisions that had left advisors unsettled and allies questioning their trust. He didn't raise his voice, but he made sure the context was there, the timing, the consequences, and the unmistakable thread that led back to Trump himself. Watching it unfold, viewers realized these weren't vague accusations. They were specific enough to be checked, undeniable enough to leave an imprint. For Trump, this was a nightmare unraveling live on air. His instinct was to brand everything as fake news, to wave it away with dismissive hand gestures and a barrage of insults. But the problem was that Obama wasn't presenting the information like an opponent trying to win a debate. He was presenting it like a witness. He wasn't emotional. He wasn't theatrical. He was careful, deliberate, and matter-of-fact. Each point landed with the weight of credibility. The host, caught between fascination and disbelief, asked for clarification on one of the details, and Obama leaned in, repeating it with the same composure. No wavering, no hesitation. For viewers at home, that small reinforcement made it even more real. And for Trump, watching in private, it made his frustration boil into rage. He paced the room, muttering about betrayal, about disloyalty, about how the media was conspiring. Yet deep down, he recognized the danger. These were not claims that could be easily brushed off. They were substantive, layered with enough depth to be investigated further. The audience's reaction was telling. Instead of clapping or cheering, they sat in a heavy silence, absorbing the implications. This wasn't entertainment, it was revelation. Social media began to light up, not with memes or jokes, but with threads of people quoting exact sentences, analyzing the meaning, and cross-referencing known events. It was as if Obama had unlocked a door, and suddenly the public was peering inside a chamber they had only speculated about before. What cut even deeper was how personal the revelations became without ever resorting to insults. Obama mentioned Trump by name repeatedly, but always in the context of choices, actions, and consequences. He didn't paint him as a caricature or a villain. He painted him as a man who had knowingly kept the truth from those he swore to serve. That distinction gave the words their sting. Trump wasn't being attacked, he was being exposed. And that exposure was what left him so unsettled. He slammed a fist against the table, demanding someone shut down the broadcast, even though he knew that wasn't possible. He shouted at aides about loyalty, about enemies within the system, about how Obama was orchestrating this moment to destroy him. But the more he shouted, the more powerless he felt. The damage wasn't being done through fiery accusations, it was being done through carefully chosen words, spoken softly but carrying the weight of secrets long kept in the dark. By the time the segment concluded, the audience was still processing. They hadn't expected to walk away with such specific, shocking information. And Trump, sitting in his private space, realized that for the first time in a long while, his usual defenses wouldn't hold. Secrets that once gave him leverage had now been turned against him, laid bare for the nation to see by the one man he couldn't silence. Do you want me to continue with Keynote 3 expansion in 700 words the same way? Trump's reaction to Obama's words was not something hidden behind closed doors for long. It became visible almost immediately. The cameras weren't on him, but those around him later described the same picture. A man unraveling in real time, unable to contain the storm rising inside him. At first, when Obama's revelations started flowing, Trump responded with his usual tactic of dismissive laughter. He chuckled loudly to himself, muttering that Obama was a liar and that no one would believe him. But the calm precision of Obama's delivery chipped away at that bravado, leaving behind a raw edge that grew sharper with every sentence. He slammed the remote down and cranked up the television volume, as if hearing the words louder would somehow make them less threatening. The smirk that had crept across his face at the beginning vanished, replaced by a tight, grim expression. His jaw locked, his shoulders stiffened, and soon he was on his feet, pacing back and forth across the room. His aides, who had grown accustomed to his temper, exchanged uneasy glances, knowing that the situation was spiraling. The moment Obama repeated his name, linking him directly to one of the shocking secrets, Trump exploded. He shouted at the screen, veins bulging in his neck, accusing Obama of treachery. His voice bounced off the walls, rattling the silence of the room. "He's making it all up," he roared, though the cracks in his tone betrayed a deeper anxiety. For a man who built his brand on control, dominance, and projection, losing composure in private meant something more dangerous was happening. Fear. The fury soon translated into chaos. He grabbed his phone, his weapon of choice, and began typing furiously, thumbs hammering out words in all caps. But the posts didn't come out as sharp attacks. They came out scattered, fragmented, as though his anger was outpacing his ability to form coherent thoughts. He deleted, retyped, then deleted again, realizing nothing he could write would match the weight of what Obama was saying live. For once, words failed him, and that realization only pushed him deeper into frustration. The aides tried to calm him, offering talking points or suggesting he ignored the broadcast altogether, but he snapped at them. Every attempt at reasoning was met with accusations of betrayal. His paranoia grew with his rage. "They're all in on it," he muttered, pacing faster, his hands clenching into fists. "He's trying to take me down, and you people aren't doing anything to stop it." His voice grew louder, shaking with anger, and staffers found excuses to step out, unwilling to stand in the path of his fury. Meanwhile, the country was witnessing the other side of the moment. Millions of viewers at home saw Obama remain calm, steady, and precise. They didn't see Trump's meltdown directly, but fragments of it slipped out through leaks and whispers later on. Stories spread of him hurling papers across the room, shouting into his phone at political allies, demanding instant defenses, and threatening consequences for anyone who failed to publicly denounce Obama. The meltdown itself became part of the story, a silent confirmation of just how much those revelations had rattled him. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been sharper. Obama, composed and unshaken, revealed secrets with the ease of a man confident in his words. Trump, in response, descended into visible panic, a man stripped of the ability to mask his emotions. Those around him had seen his temper before, but this was different. This wasn't just anger, it was desperation. The reaction of someone watching the walls of control close in on him. Phones in his circle buzzed constantly as allies called to reassure him, but even their voices couldn't calm him down. He barked orders, demanding loyalty tests, insisting that everyone immediately discredit what had been said. But the problem was clear. The revelations had substance, and Obama's tone made them sound undeniable. Trump's rage only confirmed, for many, that there was truth behind the words. If there wasn't, why would he be unraveling so violently? He stormed into another room, slamming doors behind him, ranting to no one in particular. He complained about enemies in the government, conspiracies in the media, and vendettas from former presidents. His voice cracked more than once, and though he tried to hide it with volume, the cracks revealed what he feared most, that the secrets he had worked so hard to keep hidden were no longer in his control. By the end of the broadcast, Trump was exhausted, his face flushed, his hands still trembling. His outburst had shaken his team, left him isolated in his rage, and, most importantly, had shown just how deeply Obama's words had cut. For all his bluster and bravado, the public image of control had collapsed in private, leaving only the portrait of a man who had truly lost it in the face of exposure he could not stop. Do you want me to expand keynote for in the same detailed? 700. The fallout from the live broadcast was unlike anything the country had seen in recent memory. It wasn't just another political interview or a fiery back and forth between rivals. It was a national moment that sent shockwaves across every corner of the public sphere. Within minutes of Obama finishing his revelations, phones lit up, newsrooms scrambled to rewrite their headlines, and social media erupted with threads and debates. What gripped people wasn't only the content of what had been said, it was the way the information had been delivered. Calm, deliberate, undeniable, and with Trump's name tied to each revelation, the impact was seismic. Families at home sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just heard. Some rewound the broadcast, replaying segments to make sure they had understood correctly. Others jumped online, quoting Obama's words verbatim, dissecting them with a mixture of disbelief and alarm. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It felt like history unfolding in real time. Even those who had long defended Trump found themselves wrestling with the weight of the revelations. For the first time, there wasn't a shouting match to point to, no heated argument to dismiss as partisan noise. Instead, there was substance, presented with precision, and it demanded attention. News outlets began running split-screen broadcasts. On one side, clips of Obama delivering his revelations, each sentence measured and unwavering. On the other, reactions from analysts, many of whom admitted on air that they had never seen Trump so vulnerable. Leaks from his inner circle painted the image of a man in meltdown, shouting at screens, throwing accusations, and demanding loyalty pledges. Those leaks became stories of their own, reinforcing the impression that Obama's words had cut deeper than Trump could handle. What struck the public most was the contrast. Obama's calm composure stood in stark opposition to the chaos being reported from Trump's world. It created a narrative that was hard to escape. One man had spoken with quiet authority, while the other had unraveled under the weight of exposure. That contrast alone shifted perceptions. People who had grown numb to years of political clashes found themselves jolted awake, asking questions they hadn't asked in a long time. International audiences tuned in as well, and foreign media outlets carried headlines that echoed the same sentiment. A former president had revealed what many suspected but few dared to say aloud, and the man at the center of it, Trump, was reacting in ways that confirmed the seriousness of the moment. Allies overseas raised eyebrows, adversaries smirked, and the global stage watched as America once again found itself in the middle of a storm created by its most polarizing figure. For Trump, the public shockwave was a nightmare. He thrived on controlling the narrative, on bending attention to his advantage, but this was different. The calm tone of the revelations left him with little to attack. There was no fiery insult from Obama to counter with a sharper jab. There was no exaggeration he could frame as a lie. Instead, there were details specific, weighty, and repeated by millions across the country. Each time his name trended online, it wasn't for a victory speech or a rally highlight. It was tied to the secrets Obama had calmly laid out for the world. The silence that followed in many living rooms carried its own weight. People weren't just reacting in anger or support, they were processing. Some asked aloud how such truths could have been hidden for so long. Others wondered what consequences would follow. And still others, longtime supporters of Trump, shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to defend against revelations that didn't come from political rivals in Congress or anonymous sources in the press, but from a former president speaking directly to the nation. As the hours turned into days, the shockwave didn't fade, it deepened. Investigations were called for, reporters dug into the details, and commentators pointed out that the real story was not only in the secrets themselves, but in Trump's reaction. The reports of his outburst, his frantic attempts to control the fallout, became as damning as the revelations. To the public, it appeared that a man who had always projected dominance was finally cornered. The country buzzed with a mixture of disbelief and certainty. Disbelief that such secrets had been carried so long without exposure, and certainty that something irreversible had taken place. Conversations at dinner tables, workplaces, and community spaces circled back to the same subject: what Obama had said and how Trump had reacted. It became the story no one could ignore, no matter how much he tried to shout it down. By the end of the week, it was clear that the calm exposure had done more damage than any heated confrontation ever could. The public had seen the contrast. For themselves, they had witnessed one man remain composed while revealing truths, and another lose control when confronted with them. And that image Obama steady on live television. Trump unraveling in fury burned itself into the collective memory, leaving the nation buzzing with a shock that refused to fade. Do you want me to now craft the ending statements in 500 words that tie all four keynotes together? What lingered after the broadcast was not just the memory of Obama's words, but the unmistakable contrast they created. For years, Trump had thrived on being the loudest voice in the room, setting the tempo of the national conversation through force, repetition, and bravado. But in one evening, that rhythm was broken. The quiet delivery of another former president had stripped him of his armor, revealing not only the secrets he had worked so hard to protect, but also the fragility of his composure when faced with undeniable truths. The shock was not in the theatrics of the moment, but in its simplicity. The first keynote showed that tone can be more powerful than volume. Obama's calmness unsettled Trump more than anger ever could, because it left no easy target for rebuttal. His composure was its own kind of weapon, cutting through the noise with a precision that shouting could never achieve. Trump's anger fed on confrontation, but there was none to feed on just, an unshakable presence that turned silence into something heavier than words. The second keynote reminded the public that substance matters. These were not rumors, not whispers, not vague innuendos. They were specifics, carefully laid out, tethered to real events and decisions. Trump's usual defenses, calling it fake, branding it lies, fell flat because the revelations were too grounded to dismiss. And in that grounding, people saw something they hadn't seen in a long time. Accountability presented with clarity. The third keynote showed the cost of exposure. Trump's visible breakdown, the fury and pacing, the shouted denials and frantic attempts to regain control, painted a picture that contradicted the strongman image he had spent years cultivating. His inability to remain composed in private became public knowledge through leaks, and those stories carried their own kind of confirmation. People could see that Obama's calm dismantling of secrets had rattled him far more than any loud attack ever had. And finally, the fourth keynote captured the shockwave that rippled through the public. It wasn't just a story for a day. It became the conversation of a nation. Families, commentators, allies, and critics all processed the same truth. One man revealed, one man exposed. The silence of the audience, the frenzy of the media, the unease of Trump's supporters, each reaction added to the sense that something irreversible had been revealed on live television. Together, These moments reshaped how people saw the clash between two figures who had defined such different eras of leadership. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation with sparks flying and insults hurled across the stage. It was quieter, steadier, and therefore more lasting. Trump had always counted on noise to drown out substance, but in this case, silence carried the greater weight. The calm tone, the detailed revelations, the unraveling response, and the public's stunned reaction fused into a single truth. Some moments in history don't need theatrics to shock. They need only clarity. Asterisk in clarity was what remained. It was the detail in Obama's words, the unraveling in Trump's reaction, and the stunned silence of a nation left to process secrets that could no longer be hidden. In the end, it wasn't the volume of the revelation that shook people. It was the undeniability of it. Do you want me to now compile all 4 keynote expansions plus the ending statements?